When we say calm people always win, we're not making a sentimental statement. We're describing a psychological reality. Calmness, properly understood, is not the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. And that mastery is power. Not in the aggressive, domineering sense that often passes for strength today, but in the deeper, more enduring sense of self-command. A calm person is not someone who lacks the capacity for anger or fear or ambition. They are someone who has brought those forces under conscious direction. Now, let's be very clear about this: calmness is not weakness. That confusion arises because people mistake reactivity for strength. When someone explodes in anger or panic, they seem powerful for a moment, loud, animated, dominant. But if you examine those moments closely, what you see is a person who has lost control. They're being pulled by emotion rather than guided by principle. They may intimidate, but they don't lead. They may make noise, but they don't make progress. The calm person, in contrast, remains rooted when others are thrown off balance. This doesn't mean they're emotionally flat or indifferent. Quite the opposite. Their calmness comes from an internal structure, a mental architecture built on discipline, thought, and self-awareness. It is what the Stoics called ataraxia, a state of equanimity achieved not by suppressing emotion, but by understanding its place in the hierarchy of the mind. Consider this in every arena of life, whether it's a boardroom negotiation, a personal relationship, or a moment of crisis. The person who can remain composed under pressure will be the one who sees clearly. And if you can see clearly, you can act effectively. That's what makes calmness such a competitive advantage. It allows for perspective. It allows for strategy. Most importantly, it allows for response over reaction. You cannot outthink someone who's calm when you're emotionally hijacked. And you won't make better decisions in a panic than someone who has trained themselves to slow down when it matters most. The calm person owns the moment, not because they dominate it forcefully, but because they refuse to be dominated by it. And that, psychologically, is a winning position. Let's take this even deeper. From a philosophical standpoint, calmness is a function of sovereignty. It means you have claimed responsibility for your inner world. You are not outsourced to circumstances. You don't rely on external validation to feel okay. You don't collapse when things go wrong, because your stability doesn't depend on things always going right. That's not detachment in the cold sense. It's groundedness. It's knowing who you are and operating from that center rather than constantly reacting to the chaos around you. This doesn't mean you never feel anxious or frustrated. It means you've trained yourself to integrate those emotions rather than be ruled by them. You've learned that it's more productive to be still than to be scattered. And you've realized, through experience or discipline, that nothing good comes from losing your head. That doesn't mean you don't raise your voice when necessary. It means you choose when and how, because you're not a slave to the moment. You're the master of it. That kind of control, not over others, but over yourself, is the foundation of lasting influence. It's not flashy, and it doesn't always get immediate applause. But over time, it wins. It builds trust. It builds clarity. And it builds the kind of presence that can hold steady when the world is shaking. So here's what I want you to think about. In a world that rewards speed and reaction, be the person who slows down and responds. In a culture that confuses noise with power, be the presence that speaks with calm authority. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voice that wins, it's the most centered one. Calmness creates clarity. This isn't just a poetic observation, it's a psychological truth with immense practical consequence. The calmer you are, the more clearly you see. And that clarity of perception, of thought, of intention, is the raw material from which all good decisions are made. When you're in a reactive state, stressed, overwhelmed, emotionally scattered, your vision narrows. This isn't metaphorical. Neurologically, the amygdala hijacks your attention. Your brain shifts from reflective processing to reflexive survival. You begin to see people not as people, but as threats or obstacles. You lose nuance. You lose perspective. You lose the ability to reason through complexity. That's what panic does. It shrinks the world down to a single urgent frame: escape, attack, defend. But most of life doesn't require escape, attack, or defense. It requires discernment. And discernment requires a calm mind. A mind that can hold multiple variables at once without collapsing into confusion. A mind that can step back, assess, and respond in proportion to the situation. That's what clarity gives you proportion. Let's take this further. From a cognitive standpoint, calmness preserves working memory. That's the mental bandwidth you need to hold facts, weigh consequences, and simulate different outcomes. When you're anxious or emotionally flooded, that bandwidth is severely reduced. Your internal noise drowns out your capacity to think. You start reacting not to the situation itself, but to the story you've told yourself about it. Usually one rooted in fear, resentment, or insecurity. A calm person doesn't eliminate that internal narrative, but they create enough space to question it. They pause. And in that pause, they regain access to the full picture. That's clarity. It's not the absence of emotion. It's the alignment of thought and emotion toward reality rather than illusion. This is why calm people often seem wise. It's not that they know everything. It's that they can see clearly enough to know what matters. They're not paralyzed by noise. They don't confuse urgency with importance. They don't rush into decisions just to relieve discomfort. They stay with the tension long enough to understand it. And then they act, not because they're pressured, but because they're prepared. Now, from a philosophical point of view, clarity is tied to responsibility. You cannot see clearly if you refuse to look at your own role in a situation. Clarity requires humility, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to accept that you might be wrong, or at least incomplete. And calmness supports that humility. When you're calm, your ego isn't as loud. You don't need to be right immediately. You're more open to correction, to learning, to adaptation. There's a kind of quiet courage in that. The courage to let reality be what it is, rather than forcing it to fit your assumptions. And that courage, when exercised consistently, is transformative. It makes you a better thinker, a better communicator, a better leader. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've cultivated the one condition that allows real answers to emerge, a clear, undistorted view of what's actually happening. Imagine what would change in your life if, in your most intense moments, you could pause, just for a breath, and ask what's really going on here. Not what you fear is going on, not what you hope is going on, but what is actually going on. That question, asked calmly, has the power to alter the entire trajectory of a conflict, a conversation, even a career. So the next time you're tempted to rush, to react, to make a move just to feel like you're doing something, don't. Get calm first. Because only when you're calm can you be clear. And only when you're clear can you win in a way that lasts. Emotional control is not optional if you intend to lead a meaningful life. It's not a luxury for the spiritually enlightened or the psychologically sophisticated. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to build something that lasts. In fact, you could argue that every long-term victory, whether in business, relationships, or personal development, depends on your ability to regulate your emotional state in the face of uncertainty, criticism, and chaos. Let's define what emotional control actually means. It doesn't mean the suppression of emotion. It doesn't mean pretending you're unaffected or pushing everything down until you explode later. That's not strength. That's repression. Emotional control, properly understood, is integration. It's the process of recognizing what you feel, understanding why you feel it, and then choosing how to respond in a way that aligns with your values and your goals. Now this is hard, extremely hard, because our emotions are ancient. They were shaped in environments where speed of reaction meant the difference between life and death. But we don't live in that world anymore. Most of our threats are social, psychological, reputational, not physical. And yet the same circuits fire off. Someone questions your competence and you feel as if your very existence is under siege. Your body prepares for battle. Fight, flee, freeze. It's all automatic unless you've trained yourself to pause and redirect that impulse. This is why calm people have a strategic edge. They are not being run by ancient wiring. They've developed the capacity to observe the emotion without being consumed by it. And that distance, however small, gives them choice. You can't choose what you don't see. You can't redirect what you haven't acknowledged. So emotional control begins not with suppression, but with awareness. From that awareness comes power. Because once you see the emotion clearly, you can begin to interpret it wisely. You can ask, is this reaction appropriate to the situation? Or is it a leftover pattern from childhood, from trauma, from fear? Is this anger actually about this person? Or is it something unresolved in me? That kind of self-interrogation requires courage. But it also gives you leverage. Because now, you're not reacting randomly. You're responding consciously. And what do we know about people who respond consciously? They rise. In every domain, they become the ones others look to when things go sideways. They don't add fuel to the fire. They hold the frame. They stay grounded. They project calm authority. And in doing so, they influence the entire emotional tone of the room. That's leadership. Not controlling others, but mastering yourself so thoroughly that your presence becomes a stabilizing force. There's a psychological principle at play here called emotional contagion. Emotions are socially contagious. We mirror each other instinctively. So if you bring calm into a charged space, others begin to self-regulate around you. That's how you lead without saying a word. You show people, through your own discipline, what it means to stay centered. That has a profound effect, whether in a family dynamic, a corporate environment, or even a crisis situation. Philosophically, this comes down to sovereignty. The calm person is sovereign over their own inner world. They do not hand over the keys to anyone who provokes them. They do not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent consequences. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. And wisdom, when consistently applied, becomes power. Not the kind of power that dominates or manipulates, but the kind that transforms yourself first, and then others by extension. So here's the insight to carry with you: every moment you resist being ruled by emotion is a moment you reclaim your power. And over time, that adds up to a life that isn't reactive, but directed, intentionally, skillfully, purposefully. Because those who master themselves don't just survive, they shape the world around them. There's a reason calm people tend to earn trust more easily than the rest. It's not just about what they say, it's about what they don't say when provoked. It's about what they don't do when the situation invites chaos. There's a kind of quiet authority in someone who stays composed when everything around them is fraying at the edges. People notice that, not intellectually at first, but instinctively. They feel it. And in that feeling, trust begins to form. You see, trust isn't built on words alone. It's built on consistency under pressure. It's built on the reliability of someone's emotional state, especially when things go wrong. And respect, real respect, isn't given to those who shout the loudest or demand it through position or performance. It's given to those who demonstrate repeatedly that they can remain stable while others unravel. That's the kind of person people want to follow. Not because they're the most dominant, but because they're the most centered. Think of the leaders you've admired in your life, not just in formal roles, but in any context. Teachers, mentors, friends, maybe even strangers you encountered during a moment of crisis. What did they have in common? Likely, they made you feel safe, not by shielding you from the world, but by modeling calmness in the face of it. Their presence told you, without needing to explain it, this can be handled. We'll think it through. Let's not make it worse by losing our heads. That's a powerful psychological effect. When someone around you is calm, your nervous system begins to mirror it. Your heart rate slows. Your mental noise quiets. Suddenly, the path forward becomes a little clearer. That kind of influence is subtle, but it's profound. It's the basis for real leadership, not coercion, not manipulation. Influence, earned through self-regulation and modeled through behavior. Now, from a philosophical perspective, this brings us to the idea of virtue, not in a moralistic or religious sense, but as Aristotle meant it, excellence of character. A virtuous person is someone who has trained themselves to act in accordance with what is best, even when it's difficult. Calmness, in this context, is a virtue because it reflects mastery over one's impulses and alignment with one's higher values. And that kind of character naturally earns respect. People may not always agree with the calm person, but they rarely dismiss them. Why? Because calmness signals integrity. It suggests that the person isn't simply reacting. They're thinking, weighing, holding something higher in view. You can't fake that kind of presence for long. People are remarkably good, often unconsciously, at detecting internal instability. It leaks through body language, tone, microexpressions. So if your calmness is a mask, it won't last. But if it's real, if it's rooted in discipline and clarity, it will radiate and people will gravitate toward it. Not because you're flashy, but because you're safe to trust in a world full of volatility. And that matters deeply, because trust and respect are the currency of human connection. You can't build anything sustainable without them. not a business, not a relationship, not a reputation. Calmness isn't just good for you, it's what makes you a reliable point of orientation for others. In a chaotic environment, you become the anchor. In a culture that rewards outrage and volatility, you become the exception. The person others remember not for what you shouted, but for how you stayed composed when it mattered most. So here's what I want you to take with you. People may not always understand your calmness. They may misread it as indifference or detachment. Let them. Over time, your consistency will speak for itself, because in a world of noise, the quietest voice often carries the most weight. There's a deep and often overlooked connection between stillness and focus, between calm and the capacity to stay the course. In a world that's constantly accelerating, where distraction is not only common but monetized, calmness becomes a form of rebellion. It's a refusal to be hijacked by every passing urgency, every flicker of noise, every demand on your attention. Calm people win because they don't scatter their energy. They conserve it, they direct it, and they apply it with patience over time. Focus is not simply a matter of willpower. It's a state of mind, and that state is only sustainable when you're internally calm. When you're anxious or emotionally agitated, your mind jumps, constantly seeking relief, novelty, or stimulation. You can sit in front of a task for hours and get nothing done because your inner world is chaotic. Your attention becomes fragmented. You're thinking about 5 different outcomes, 3 imagined consequences, and a dozen unfinished priorities. That's not focus. That's internal noise masquerading as business. Calmness silences that noise, not by eliminating all thought, but by organizing it. When you're calm, you can think in sequence. You can hold one idea long enough to follow it through, and perhaps more importantly, you can tolerate the discomfort that comes with deep work. Because let's be honest, anything meaningful takes time. It takes repetition, failure, refinement. And that process is tedious, even painful, without the ability to endure boredom or resist immediate gratification. This is where patience comes in. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity, but it's not that at all. Patience is strength under time pressure. It's the refusal to be rushed by the expectations of others or your own impulse for quick results. Calm people don't rush decisions out of fear. They don't abandon plans the moment they meet resistance. Why? Because their internal state isn't being governed by urgency, it's governed by intention. Now, psychologically speaking, this is critical. The ability to delay gratification, to resist the pull of short-term reward in service of a long-term goal, is one of the most reliable predictors of success across the board. Academic achievement, financial stability, relationship quality, all of these correlate with emotional regulation and impulse control. And both of those are rooted in calmness. A calm person can step back and ask, what matters most right now? What's the cost of abandoning this too early? What will this look like 6 months or 6 years from now? That long view is only possible when the mind is quiet enough to look beyond the moment. Because the moment, let's be honest, is often uncomfortable. You don't feel like writing the next page, making the next call, going to the gym again. But the calm person doesn't require every moment to feel good. They've learned to sit with that discomfort and keep moving forward anyway. That's not just discipline. It's maturity. It's the mark of someone who's oriented towards something greater than emotional relief. Philosophically, this points to a fundamental truth. Progress is not an event. It's a pattern. It's not one big win. It's a series of small, consistent steps taken over time. And calmness is what allows you to keep walking, especially when results are invisible, or when no one is watching, or when your efforts feel unrewarded. Because the calm person doesn't need external reinforcement at every stage. They've committed to the path, and that commitment holds, even when emotions fluctuate. So here's the challenge: train yourself to stay. Stay focused when it's hard. Stay disciplined when it's boring. Stay calm when the results aren't immediate. Because if you can learn to hold your ground internally, the world around you will start to bend to your consistency. And that's not just how you win. That's how you become the kind of person who deserves to. At some point, we all have to ask you, what kind of strength really lasts? Is it the brute force of someone who can dominate a room, or the quiet resilience of someone who can endure without collapsing? Because if you look carefully, across history, literature, leadership, even within your own life, you'll start to see a pattern. The people who endure, the ones who bend without breaking, who adapt without losing themselves, are not the loudest or most aggressive. They're the calm ones, the stable ones, the ones who've made peace with discomfort and learned how to carry the weight of life without flinching every time it shifts. We talk a lot about strength in our culture, but too often we confuse strength with force, with control, with domination. But real strength is internal. It's what you fall back on when everything else gets stripped away. Calmness is not weakness. It is one of the purest forms of strength because it requires discipline, self-knowledge, and the ability to hold tension without falling apart. In psychological terms, we might call this emotional resilience. It's the capacity to return to equilibrium after being knocked off balance. Not to deny the impact of difficulty, but to integrate it, to come back stronger, wiser, more centered. That kind of strength isn't built through comfort. It's forged through challenge, and through the ability to remain calm enough to process that challenge constructively. There's a neurobiological foundation here. When we're calm, we remain in the parasympathetic nervous system, what's often called rest and digest. This state allows us to recover, to reflect, to reset. It's where healing happens, where integration of learning takes place. But when we live in a constant state of fight or flight, what so many people accept as normal, our bodies and minds never get the chance to reset. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to erode, mental clarity fades, sleep suffers, relationships fracture, and we wonder why we feel burnt out, disconnected, lost. Calmness restores us. It creates the conditions under which long-term growth is possible. Think of it like this: if life is a storm, and in many ways it is, then your ability to stay calm is what determines whether you are tossed around by it or whether you can navigate through it. Calm doesn't make the storm go away. It gives you the internal ballast to stay upright while it passes. And that's what resilience really is: not avoiding difficulty, but becoming the kind of person who can meet it without being undone. From a philosophical standpoint, this invites a deeper kind of responsibility. If you know that your calmness affects not just your own well-being, but also your relationships, your community, even your legacy, then cultivating it becomes a moral task. You are no longer just managing stress, you're stewarding strength. And not for show, but because you understand that the quality of your character is your contribution to the world. People often ask, how do I become unshakable? The answer is never quick, but it always begins here, with the willingness to be calm even when it's easier to panic, to endure when it's tempting to retreat, and to remain steady when life asks you to be more than you thought you could be. That's how inner strength is built, through repeated acts of calmness in moments of chaos. So when everything feels uncertain and you're tempted to force your way forward, pause, breathe, return to stillness. Because true strength doesn't roar, it endures, and those who endure with calm in their heart are the ones who win, not just in life, but through it.